Muy buenos días, tengan todos ustedes. Soy el doctor Oscar Valencia, coordinador de este espacio de educación médica continua. Soy pediatra, profesor de la Escuela de Medicina y Ciencias de la Salud del Tecnológico de Monterrey. Y nos da mucho gusto que nos acompañen el día de hoy. Les recordamos que hagan el favor de silenciar sus micrófonos. También les recordamos que al final de la plática se harán las preguntas a nuestros ponentes. Pueden poner sus preguntas en el chat y al final les suplicamos que nos hagan favor de llenar una encuesta de satisfacción, ya sea a través de la liga que estará en el chat o en el código QR también. En nombre de la Escuela de Medicina y Ciencias de la Salud del Tecnológico de Monterrey, les doy la más cordial bienvenida a esta sesión de pediatría. El día de hoy tenemos un tema importante, que es la intervención temprana y el apoyo que se le da a los niños y a sus familias. Es un problema que frecuentemente como pediatras nos enfrentamos el día a día. Tenemos que acompañarlos, darle mejor consejo, hacer la mejor referencia y trabajar en equipo con otras disciplinas. Es por eso que quiero agradecer a la maestra Ana Paula Martínez y a la doctora Erin Barton por su participación en esta sesión, que nos van a compartir sus experiencias y sus conocimientos. Voy a dar una pequeña reseña de nuestros ponentes. La maestra Ana Paula Martínez Cueto es licenciada en Ciencias del Aprendizaje Aplicado y el Desarrollo por la Universidad de Austin, en Texas. Tiene una maestría en Educación Especial, Intervención Temprana y Análisis Conductual Aplicado por la Universidad de Venderbilt, en Tennessee. Actualmente es la directora de COMATI, Centro de Intervención Temprana, y ella trabajó durante su formación, tanto en pregrado como posgrado, fue maestra auxiliar, ha funcionado también durante su formación como terapeuta, es autora en varias líneas de investigación y tiene una amplia gama de certificaciones que la acredita para poder hacer su trabajo. La doctora Erin Barton tiene una licenciatura en Desarrollo Humano y Estudios Familiares por University of Illinois. Tiene un máster en Early Childhood Intervention por la Universidad de DePaul, en Illinois también, y un doctorado en Educación Especial en Peabody College, perteneciente a la Universidad de Vanderbilt. Es profesora asociada del Departamento de Educación Especial de Peabody en Vanderbilt y fue codirectora del Oregon Institute of Autism and Early Childhood en Oregon hace tiempo. Tiene muchos reconocimientos y también muchas publicaciones. On behalf of the School of Medicine, Health Science of Tecnológico de Monterrey, you are most welcome, Maestra Ana Paula Martínez and Dr. Erin Barton. It's a pleasure to have you with us. So we're looking forward to hear from you. So let's get started.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Buenos días. Hola a todos, muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos. Estamos muy emocionadas de estar aquí. Esta presentación la vamos a estar dando en inglés, entonces me voy a estar cambiando de idioma. So this presentation is going to be given in English, so Erin and I can be just giving our points of views throughout the presentation and adding information as we go by. So I'm going to be sharing my screen. And be ready to go. Here we go, right? Okay. Okay, so let's get started. So we just want to start off with a little quote. That's kind of how we started back at Venderbilt. And we started with this cute quote because almost everyone here works with families, and we think that it's pretty important because everything that we do helps families, and we think that as we go through helping families and helping children, that is something to be really proud of, and that makes us pretty successful at what we do. So our itinerary for today is that we're going to briefly talk about the referral process of early intervention or an early intervention program. We're going to talk about the different programs within early intervention. Then we're going to talk about some takeaways for you to take home. We're going to share some experiences throughout the presentation. Then we are going to end with some resources within our community here in Monterrey specifically, and then we will answer some questions. So we are going to try to pace ourselves as quickly as possible. Okay, so our objective for today is that hopefully we will learn about the screening, evaluation, and references, and all the processes for an early intervention program. Then we are going to review what evidence-based interventions, and evidence-based is a pretty important term that we're going to be reviewing throughout, which ones are out there and who has the proper credentials to oversee these programs. And the third objective is that we hopefully will recognize the really important role that the pediatricians play in this process. Okay, so to start off, we use the term early intervention to describe the services and supports that are available to babies and young children, some from birth to age 6. So those who are at risk for delays, those who have developmental delays, the children who are already diagnosed with disabilities, and their families. So we are going to be including the families all throughout the intervention, as families are key to better outcomes.
And early intervention, as Paula said, it is focused on young children from birth to age 6. And the goals that we focus on in early intervention are largely driven by the needs of the family, and they fall within these 5 areas. So we focus on physical skills, all of the behaviors and skills that are important for young children as they learn to explore their environment. And that includes when little infants and babies are first learning to reach for objects or their caregiver, certainly as they start to learn to crawl and explore their environment, their large muscles, their gross motor skills, and then walking. And then as children get older, we work on more fine motor skills such as drawing and writing and even building with blocks. We're always working on problem solving and helping children learn to problem solve and think critically about what's happening in their environment, and we call those cognitive skills. A primary focus, and one of the goals that should always be included if children have these delays, are communication skills. All children need a functional way to communicate, and so this is a skill that's probably most common and a very common focus of early intervention, because communication skills are so critical for supporting children's growth in other areas. We also focus quite a bit on self-help skills or adaptive skills, and those are all the skills that children need to have to fully participate in their environment and to participate more independently in their environment. And that includes getting dressed, eating, participating in the family's daily routines and activities. And then another primary focus and something that we certainly emphasize and can work on across all goals are social emotional skills. And so those are things like helping children learn to self-soothe, helping children learn to express their emotions, and then of course helping children learn to interact with their peers. And we focus with babies, infants, really on helping them learn to develop an attachment to their primary caregiver. And then over time, as children grow and develop, we start to help them create friendships and develop friendships with their peers. And those are critical importance in early intervention. We, the definitions for a child with a disability really depend. And but the way we generally define it is if the child has a delay in their capacity to perform activities that really help them participate in society. And so what we really look at is the child able to function as a member of their family, their community, and then the broader society. And so disabilities might be related to something that's congenital or an acquired health condition. And what's also important to know is that disabilities might be temporary. They might be long-term, they might be permanent, or they might be progressive in nature. But what's really important to remember about all of these is that early intervention can help improve the trajectory for children. So regardless of what the type of disability is, we know that if we help children and their families access services early, we can improve the trajectory, and so that they can learn the skills that they need to learn. Some common examples that you, I'm sure, have heard of are autism spectrum disorder. Children are born with cerebral palsy. We often work with children who have intellectual disabilities or kind of global developmental delays. We often work with children who have Down syndrome or spina bifida. And sometimes we work with children who have acquired conditions such as a traumatic brain injury. There's one important thing that I want to note here when we are working with children and families is that disabilities can impact the child broadly, such as in all areas of their life, or it might just impact specific areas of their life. So it's really important to know that there's a wide range of ways that disability can impact children and their families. And also some disabilities are invisible. And so some disabilities might be clearly apparent and some might not be. Another really important thing to note here is that we want to remember that children are always children first, and we don't want to define them by their disability. And so when we talk about children with disabilities and their families, we use the child, the noun first, and then say with a disability. Versus labeling a child as just an autistic. And we do that because we want to emphasize that children are children first, and that they come with many, many strengths, and also all children have a range of needs. So we use what we call people first language, which is where we say like a child with Down syndrome or a child with a disability. There are, of course, some families who prefer different terms, and so unless the family has expressed that they would like us to use a different term, we always start with person first language. And so now we're going to go over the referral process for early intervention. And this is important because, as I said, when young children, and we know the younger children access early intervention, the greater the likelihood that we improve their developmental trajectory. So having a systematic referral process is really important. And the most exciting thing about this is that we know that pediatricians are often the first to see these children. And so it's really important to remember the pediatrician's role in this referral process is critically important. And the pediatrician can be the first person for whom the family indicates that they have concerns, or even the first person to note that there might be a developmental concern. So this referral process really, the pediatrician's role in it is really important. And so the steps include monitoring, screening, evaluation, and referral, and we'll go over these. So the next one is developmental. So developmental monitoring, so that is when the family members notice maybe that their child has a concern. Pediatricians might ask questions about, is your 12-month-old crawling? Are they, practicing walking? Does your 2-year-old put 2 words together? And so that there can be kind of questions that can help pediatricians, note if there might be a concern about the child's development. And then we're going to go over when to do screening and all that. But developmental monitoring really involves mostly just kind of listening to the family's concerns and observing the family. There is a really wonderful resource by the Center for Disease Control in the US called the CDC Milestones Tracker. And it's available in Spanish, which is wonderful. And it's an app for a smartphone or a device, tablet, where parents can monitor their own child's development. And it can tell the parents if maybe there is a concern about the child's development, which is can be really helpful. And then the next thing I want to talk about is developmental screening. And developmental screening is something that pediatricians can engage in, and we strongly recommend they do. And of course, the US American Academy of Pediatrics strongly recommends that pediatricians use developmental screening tools during well child checkups. The exciting thing is that developmental screening tools exist, and that they are quick, they're easy, they're relatively inexpensive, and they can give us really important information about whether or not the child should be referred to early intervention. We have some examples on this slide. The ASQ3. The ASQ is a wonderful tool. If you don't know what it is, I strongly suggest you look into the ASQ. It has been normed, translated, and interpreted in multiple populations across the world. They have just done a remarkable job with the research on it. The psychometrics are exceptional. And the best part about the ASQ is that it is very fast, it's quick, and it is so easy to score. My 7-year-old son could probably score it. It's very easy to score. And it's easy to score, which then means it can give you really quick information about whether or not you should refer a child for early intervention. And of course, I understand that, pediatricians in your offices, you're busy, you're crunched for time, and the ASQ can be really fast to administer and score. The other great thing about the ASQ is that, and many of these screening tools, is that they can be administered by really anybody. You don't have to have a special degree to administer many of these tools. And in fact, the ASQ is recommended to be completed by parents, along with a professional who can help, with the referral process. But the ASQ really can be done by a parent, which is exciting. So then there, of course, is the EDI, which is a screening tool that was developed within Mexico, and it was developed for young children in Mexico, and it focuses on many of the important domains, so motor skills, language, social, and cognition, and it can be used for children younger than 5. So when should we screen? So the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that all children at their 9-month well child checkup receive their first developmental screening. And that is something that we're going to show you a study that shows that this has increased over time. So it's not something that has always been around, but it has increased over time. So more and more pediatricians are conducting developmental screenings. And what we know is that as a result, more and more children are receiving access to high quality early intervention services, which is really exciting. So then at 18 months, children should also be re-screened, because sometimes there might be things that we don't see at 9 months, particularly communication and language. There's a big language burst we want to see around, somewhere between 12 months and 18 months. We want to see children start using language, also many other skills, but particularly language. And so we want to monitor that at 18 months. And then we also should screen for autism at 18 months and 24 months. And again, these are during well child checkups. So this is not when the child's at the pediatrician's office because they're not feeling well, because that can impact their skills and their behaviors, but it's when the child is feeling well. And probably before they receive their vaccines, you might want to ask parents about their skills, because we know that, after children get shots, they might be kind of upset, but it should be during well child checkups. And then also again at 30 months, children should be screened. So this is a study that we found that was recently published just this year. And it shows that it's a survey study, and it shows that pediatricians have dramatically increased their use of screening tools during well child checkups, which is really exciting. So they reported their increased use, it's actually tripled in these 14 years. More pediatricians are self-reporting making referrals, which is also really exciting. One thing to note about this study and what pediatricians reported is that it's not always the pediatrician who is doing the screening. Sometimes it's somebody from within the pediatrician's office who's doing the screening, but the pediatrician is always helping to interpret and analyze the results and of course make the referrals. We know as a result of this study that there are some barriers that remain. And one of the main barriers is that pediatricians sometimes are not sure who to refer children to. And so, and of course that is different depending where you're at. And so one of the things we have to work on is making sure that there are treatment options, and that early intervention, the entire system is established so that pediatricians and pediatricians' offices have clear guidelines for who to refer a child to after they've done a developmental screening. So there are some myths about screening that we wanted to just talk about and to indicate that they are a myth. So the first one is that there's no adequate screening tools for young children, and this is absolutely false. There are many screening tools, and I think the thing is we don't even really need many, but we have some really good ones like the ASQ3, which is an excellent screening tool that has really strong psychometrics and is family friendly. The next myth is that there's a great deal of training needed to administer screening correctly, and we also know that that is not true. As reported in the Lipkin study, oftentimes it was somebody from the pediatrician's office who did the screening with parents. And then of course the pediatrician helps interpret the scores and make the referrals, but you don't need extensive training to complete screening tools. And then the next one is that screening takes a lot of time, and we know it doesn't actually take much time. It can be done very quick. In fact, you can have parents, one of the things that we often do, and that in pediatricians that I've worked with, is we sometimes have parents complete the screening checklist while they're waiting for the appointment, or sometimes even before the appointment. You can send, sometimes we send parents paperwork, kind of pre-visit paperwork, and you can have parents complete it before the appointment. And then most of them are so easy to score. It's literally just, adding numbers, a few numbers, that it can be scored very quickly. And then the pediatrician can help interpret and talk to the parents about the screening results and potentially the referral process during the visit. And we know, also that, because these myths are not true, because we have good screening tools, because they can be administered by a range of staff and they don't take much time, there's really a massive cost effectiveness to doing screening, because we know that the earlier children receive early intervention, especially high quality early intervention, the better their developmental trajectory, which is going to improve family quality of life and of course be less expensive for us over time. So if the screening tool indicates that the child is, depending on the score for the ASQ, it usually means the child is, we call it below the cutoff, and that means the child should be referred for early intervention services. We have to know what to do. So what to do is to, and this is actually an important distinction about a screening tool. The screening tool does not indicate that the child has a diagnosis. The screening tool simply indicates that the child should be referred to early intervention for follow-up testing. And so then after the child is referred, and only a small portion of children will be referred, that's the purpose of the screening tool. They're always positively skewed, meaning most children will perform really well on them. But there will be children, of course, that's why we do screening, who we identify who need further evaluation. And the developmental evaluation that is done after the referral needs to be done by a trained specialist. So somebody who is a developmental pediatrician, somebody who's a speech language pathologist, an early interventionist such as Paula, or an occupational therapist, somebody who has training. And many of the tools, the developmental evaluations, require that the person administering it is trained specifically on that tool as well. So that's the difference between screening and developmental evaluation. And developmental evaluation also will identify if the child has a disability. And so these are examples of the tools that are used. The Battelle is used very often. There's also a tool called the Bailey and the Mullen, and these are norm referenced. So there's a normative sample. It gives you a percentile rank that can tell you kind of where the child falls within kind of the normative population. And they're also standardized. So they have to be administered in a certain way. And they give you really important information about the domains in which the child needs services. So it might tell you that the child needs services focused on speech or problem solving or social emotional skills, or as I said, maybe motor skills or adaptive skills, or it also might tell you that the child needs services in all these areas. And that often happens.
Okay. So now I'm going, well, first, thank you, Erin. That was beautiful. And now we're gonna go into the different types of intervention and talk about those more specifically. First, I just wanted to briefly mention what family-centered practices are. And so family-centered practices are a belief that the best way to work with a child and the best way to meet the child's needs is within the family. And this is the most effective way to ensure that the child's safety, the permanency of the skills and their well-beings, and how we provide services that involve engagement and support, and just everything we do involves the family. So we want to make sure that we're involving the families in every step of the way. Okay, so first off, we are gonna talk about occupational therapy. So OT, as we call it, helps children develop daily living skills to perform activities of daily life. So this is implemented by occupational therapists, and they target gross and fine motor skills. So in Spanish, de motor grueso y de motor fino, and daily and adaptive skills, so daily living skills, such as self-care skills, and some sensory processing issues. We also want to make sure that when we do refer someone to an OT, we have to be really, really careful, because here specifically in Mexico, we sometimes tend to confuse OT with something called terapia sensorial, which some people will claim to say that they implement terapia sensorial, and they are not necessarily OT or certified OT. They might say that they do integración sensorial, and the same thing. So we want to make sure that whenever we refer for some sensory stuff going on with the child, that the person we're referring to has their OT credentials. And as pediatricians or family members and pediatricians have the right to ask the professional for their credentials. So also make sure that you verify their credentials before sending or referring a child to a clinic or a center or to someone. Okay, with that being said, some examples are that to address some impairments for a child with Down syndrome, they may work on grasping and hand coordination. With activities such as dressing, they might work with the child to practice skills using assistive devices. They implement a lot of assistive devices as well within the classroom to make maybe like activities more accessible for them. And aiding in participation, they will also provide strategies, not just to the children, sometimes even to the peers that work with the children and to the family members, so that the child can use inside the classroom and outside of the classroom. It can also be like self-regulation techniques if there's some sensory stuff or emotional regulation stuff going on, or assisted seating if there is a child that needs to have like flexible seating. We sometimes see that with kids with autism or maybe ADHD. Yeah, and those are some examples. Okay. Now, physical therapy, so PT, focuses on improving a child's strength, function, and mobility. So PT is implemented by physical therapists. Also, PT cannot be just implemented by anyone. We need to make sure that people have their credentials, and they target physical development through developmental milestones. So for rolling, sitting, crawling, standing, walking, jumping, running, all of those things. They focus a lot of strength, balance, coordination, and they do ranges of motions. A lot of physical therapy goes to children who have restricted motion. So we'll see physical therapists working with children with cerebral palsy. And they also evaluate the need for orthotics. So also physical therapists may be working with some other disciplines within medicine, and the usage of other supportive equipment. So an example is that for a child with CP, the physical therapist may look at the impairments related to weaknesses or poor posture and lack of coordination. So I've worked with a child with CP before, and we used a chair that we would sit her on every single day, and we would like stand her up and provide the activities up on her little chair for like half an hour. And then that was kind of like, we would work alongside the physical therapist, and that was something that, an adaptation that we had to do to her activities within the classroom instead of just sitting down or her crawling in the classroom. So also they help with walking skills if the child is able to walk, and they also help them navigate their hallways at school. Okay, so this is a really cute study. In 2013, these physical therapists worked with preschool children, and they developed hypothetical onsets of object interaction. So they were seeing that just the importance of object interaction and their effects of cognitive growth and the readiness of these preschoolers for their readiness to learn, basically. So how their object interaction, sitting, low motion behaviors affected their cognitive skills for school readiness. And the study indicated that all of these skills, even though it seems really silly or unrelated to readiness to school, like how would interacting with one object or even like a sitting behavior could impact so much a school readiness or being, yeah, so sorry. Yeah, so how could something so unrelated affect so much behavior that is so far off in the future? And they just showed how the hypothetical trajectories for children with typical development are so high up, and they're very, very different trajectories. As we can see, the straight line indicates trajectories for children with typical development. The line trajectories indicates delayed development for children. However, children that received effective early intervention or perceptual motor intervention with PT, and the hypothetical trajectory was for the children with delayed development without or ineffective early intervention. So this is what it would have been like if they hadn't received early intervention. And it's, as we can see, there is a very, very big gap within those skills and the school readiness and cognitive growth. So as we can see, early intervention and even so effective early intervention is pretty important for skill development, cognitive growth, and even school readiness.
Paula, can I say something really quick?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so one of the things that, so this is hypothetical, but there are many empirical examples of this trajectory as well in the research. And one of the things that's important to note is that the skills that we're teaching, including motor skills, social emotional skills, problem solving skills, all of those skills, when children learn them at a young age, we call many of them behavioral cusps or pivotal skills, because they help children learn all the other skills that are important for becoming a member of their community, and also for learning, and so for accessing learning opportunities in the classroom. And so one of the important things to note about these lines, and yes, they're hypothetical, as I said, there are many empirical examples in the research, is that they get wider over time. So we know that children who receive early intervention start to catch up to their peers and start to learn the skills that their peers are learning, which is important. But as you can see, children who access ineffective early intervention or don't access early intervention at all, those lines flatten. And so the differences become wider over time, which just highlights the need for effective early intervention and for effective early intervention to start as soon as we can, as soon as we note first concerns.
Thank you. Then we have speech therapy, and speech therapists focus on helping children communicate effectively. And these are implemented by speech therapists. Here in Mexico, they're known through different names. So we can so we know them as fonoaudiólogos, terapeuta del habla, terapeuta de comunicación humana, terapeuta de lenguaje y comunicación. So they target feeding or swallowing, receptive language, and expressive language. And I'm just gonna go a little bit quicker. Yeah, so basically some speech therapists can also implement the PEC system, which is a picture exchange communication system. Some children do not have those verbal skills, and they can, so verbal, I mean like, so speech production. So they communicate with the picture exchange systems. And they also train parents and teachers to be involved in the process. They also teach sign language or whatever mode that the child is communicating. And then our biasly favorite behavioral interventions. So behavioral interventionists focus on skill development and decreasing challenging behaviors. So these are implemented by a board-certified behavior analyst or a BCBA, or someone under the BCBA supervision. Again, here, unfortunately, we might encounter a lot of people saying that they may have certifications, and it might not be necessarily true. So always feel free to ask for certifications and proof of that certification. So our target is to increase functional communication. So we also focus on communication, decrease behavior to improve the quality of life for the child and family, and skill development in pretty much all areas. So cognitive, motor, joint attention, play, and social skills, which are super, super important. Okay, so if the child has challenging behaviors, we might implement a behavior support plan at school, at home, wherever necessary. We also may implement peer-mediated interventions at school to promote skill development and friendships. And we also train parents to facilitate transitions. And so the parents also have those tools to implement those skills at home. So within behavioral interventions, there are different categories. And some of you may know this as ABA or Terapia ABA. And within ABA, there are those structure ones, which are ABA or LOBAS. And then on the other side of kind of like behavioral interventions, there are naturalistic developmental interventions. And some of you may have heard of ESDM or Denver Modelo Denver, which is a new model that has been picking up popularity, especially here in Mexico. And I'm actually, that is a model that I'm pretty familiar with, and I'm doing my certification. So one applied example of the effects that the ESDM has had, and this is a pretty cool study that Dawson, one of the authors of the ESDM, did in 2010. So they had two groups of whole bunch of kids diagnosed with ASD. So they did a ESDM group and a control group. For the ESDM group, they provided 2-hour sessions twice per day for 5 days a week for 2 years. I know that sounds like a lot, and it is, compared to a monitor group. And they saw that at the end, the children who were in the ESDM group showed significant improvements in IQ, adaptive behavior, so adaptive skills, daily living skills, and even their autism diagnosis, which was incredible. So 2 years after they entered the intervention, their scores just improved so much in pretty much every aspect of their lives. And this was an RCT study. And I'm not, yeah, anyway, that's the graph. So after this study, because it it just impacted so many researchers. They decided to do a second study where they did they measured the EEG activity, so a little bit more medical. And in 2012, they measured the child's EEG all the children's EEG activity while viewing and non-social stimuli, so toys. And they reported how fast the children would look at either toy or faces. And what they found was that children in the ESEM group had a quicker latency had less latency. So they responded quicker to faces versus objects. And the children in the control group actually looked quicker to objects than to faces. So this is pretty important because throughout life, we as people, as humans, we learn by observation, and we learn through social interactions, and those social interactions that children have in early years and even throughout all of their lives are the ones that are going to open doors for us to learning, to emotional regulation, to all those cognitive skills development. And it is so important. So this study was really, really interesting and really important to see how the kids were not focusing on toys, they were focusing on faces. So so those social interactions are just really important especially for children with ASD who just struggle in general with social interactions. I don't know if you want to add anything to this, Erin?
Sure. That's a perfect example of a skill that children, that when they learn that early, then it gives them access to so many other learning opportunities. So they, once they learn how to attend to, their teacher or their primary caregiver or their peers, then they learn, they can start to imitate the behaviors of their peers, or just learn from the adults in their environment. And that joint attention, that attention to kind of social stimuli, is something that oftentimes young children with disabilities, and particularly young children with autism, don't have. And we know that that's critical for learning. That's something that many people learn from a very young age. But children with disabilities, and particularly children with autism, need extra support and extra intervention to learn how to do that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so I know that we are short on time, so I'm going to go through this this, we intended to go through this pretty quickly anyway. I just wanted to highlight that the supports for children with disabilities and their families should always involve a multidisciplinary, and we actually oftentimes use the term interdisciplinary, an interdisciplinary team, because it's not just a bunch of people working separately on different goals, but really that everybody on the team is working together, and that the early interventionist like Paula is working with a speech therapist to work on motor goals while also working on communication goals or problem solving goals, and working with OTs to make sure that you can incorporate multiple goals into the learning activities that you're doing. And we do this all the time, and we know that it is highly effective for supporting children and their families. And also it allows you to be more family-centered, because then when everybody kind of is on the same page, then the family, it's less confusing and less complex for the family. So it's really important to make sure you have a strong interdisciplinary team, and that the adults who are working with the family are working together. This is what the intake process looks like for families. Usually there's a parent interview, and during that interview, that's where you really learn. So from the evaluation, you kind of get what the child's strengths and areas of need are. And then with a conversation with the family, you can talk to the family about what are the things that are their biggest concerns, concerns and perhaps most important for you to focus on right away. And then you'll develop goals, and then you develop an intervention plan, and it's best to do that as a whole team. And so as a whole team, you come up with an intervention plan so that everybody knows what everybody is looking at, and then you monitor progress of the child goals over time. That's not just to show child growth, but also so you can make decisions about changing intervention over time. So the family should be involved in everything. The different interventions can occur, different interventions depending on the child's need can occur at a specialized center, at home, or at school, depending on what the child's needs. And dose is always child dependent. And so what we often say is that the dose should be based on what the child needs. And we also know that one of the best ways to increase the dosage without having it be too cost too much for the family or be too burdensome for the family is to train the family in how to support the child during the family's daily routines and activities. And so that can help you reduce the costs, because I know that for many families, these interventions they're paying for them, they're out-of-pocket expenses. What's really important, we showed you that trajectory about children who receive effective services versus ineffective. There are many fad treatments out there, or treatments that people are essentially, just trying to sell, and unfortunately just trying to make money from. But we know that there are many treatments that aren't effective. So just make sure that we just want to make sure that families are receiving information about evidence-based practices. And there are many different types of interventions that children might receive. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Paula to finish it up.
Thank you. Yeah, so just some takeaways to basically conclude the presentation is that, and these are evidence-based arguments. So learning about EI, or early intervention, is very, very important because parents rely heavily on pediatricians for information and advice. So knowing what services are out there, and even who in the community provides these services, and who is actually certified to provide these services, and who gives out quality services in the community, is pretty important, because parents are going to come to you and ask, like, oh my gosh, something's happening with my child, who can I refer them to? And the pediatrician maybe could know or have heard of someone, or has a list of someone. So I will just dedicate one more minute at the end to give you guys a little list of some people who I personally know and have been vouched for. So pediatricians can also, so support by knowing the services and the referral processes, and also make sure that you can take a proactive role if you want to. You can ask the parents how they're doing, if they need anything, if you can help them with the diagnostic process, or if they need support with goals or monitoring. So always feel free to be a part of that multidisciplinary team, not just from evaluation, but also the therapeutic or intervention team. Also, you can always provide counsel and advice. You have been out there for a long time, and probably like what's recommended medically more than us. So always advise and counsel families, and make sure that the child goes to an evidence-based practice center. That is really, really critical, as effective interventions are the best way to support a family versus non-effective interventions, because we are only going to waste a child's time and family's money. So also, one thing that's really, really important to note is that through pediatricians' encouragement, there is a study that says that parents are more likely to take their children to appointments and to bear that responsibility of following through intervention plans. So that we would like to ask you for your help with that little push of parents to say, like, you know what, early intervention is really important. It does help. You can do this. Yeah, so that is basically what we have for you today. The last thing is that there is one last thing. So recently, Dr. Juan Francisco Lozano, who you heard several weeks ago, and I created this Red de Recursos para el Neurodesarrollo. We contacted several organizations and clinics here in Monterrey, and we created this little document that has a list of clinics who provide services, and they have their credentials. So if you want to go take a look or ask me for references, you can always do that. Okay, and that is, oh, thank you. So I know that we have like 5 minutes to answer questions.
Thank you, Ana Paula and Erin, for this wonderful presentation. You gave us a broad view of early intervention and the need for support for not only for the children, but also for the families. I have a question for Erin. For the screening for autism, it's recommended to be done at 18 months. Is it early? Is it possible to get that screening before that age? Is it possible before 1 year of age?
Yeah, so absolutely. If you have concerns before 18 months, then there are screening tools you can use as early as 12 months. Yes, especially if you have concerns. What we really say is that at least by 18 months, you should do an ASD screening tool. Now, there are some children, and because children are so young, and also because we know that children's, especially very young children, I mean, you all know babies, each day is going to be very different. And so the younger they are, the screening tools might not be as sensitive or to detecting children who might have autism. But that's why it's so important to do a screening tool at least by 18 months and then again at 24 months for young children, and especially for young children for whom we might have concerns about autism. But if you have concerns earlier, then absolutely. We have screening tools like the MChat you can do as young as 12 months.
Good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ana Paula, you addressed the family-centered practices with, the different therapies and interventions. And also, you're the one who coordinate those therapies. What's the way you work with a pediatrician? Because the pediatrician is the one who makes the screening and the first evaluation and the reference. But after this child has been giving them some therapy, what's the role of the pediatrician? You go back and forth with the information with the pediatrician? Yeah,
it depends on if the pediatrician wants to be involved. Then yeah, for sure, either I can be in contact with the pediatrician and just update him on how the child is doing and progressing, or the family can be the one who's telling the pediatrician how the child is progressing through the update. So for example, I give the family 3-month updates on how the child is doing usually. So depending, it depends on the situation and if the pediatrician wants to be involved. There are some pediatricians who are pretty involved and some pediatricians who are more, who decide to just do the referral. So it just depends. But yeah, for sure, like we can be updating the pediatrician on how the child is developing those skills. Mm-hmm.
Okay, because as a pediatrician, we have to be involved. We should be involved, and we should have the following. You know what's going on with that children. So okay, well, I think that we're done, and we thank you very much. We're very pleased to have you with us. But before we go, we have a sad announcement to address to our community. En nombre de la Escuela de Medicina y Ciencias de la Salud del Tecnológico de Monterrey, queremos notificar que anoche murió en la ciudad de Monterrey el doctor Alfonso Mazatán Parra, pediatra. Ha sido participante de esta sesión académica de pediatría desde que se inició hace 30 años. Queremos expresar nuestro más sentido pésame a toda su familia, a la comunidad médica, a sus pacientes, a sus colegas y a todos sus amigos. Alfonso, colega amigo, te vamos a extrañar, te recordaremos siempre con mucho cariño. Well, Ana Paula and Erin, thank you very much again for your extraordinary presentation, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gracias a todos los asistentes también. Gracias por acompañarnos y nos veremos el próximo miércoles en este mismo lugar. Gracias, buenos días.